For my Module 7 video, I chose prompt 7.2 DNA fingerprinting. One sunny afternoon in Raleigh, North Carolina, Elizabeth took her dog Millie on a walk around the neighborhood. Millie carries her favorite toy around with her everywhere, so she took it on a walk with them. 20 minutes after they got back home, her toy was nowhere to be found. Luckily, they called the police, and once they arrived on the scene, they were able to find the toy and extract a hair that was on it. From this piece of hair, they were able to identify 4 suspects that had come into contact with the toy. The suspects are Elizabeth, her mom Catherine, who was home at the time, and her friends Callie and Caroline, who had come over after the walk. Naturally, the police gathered fingerprint samples on each of the possible suspects to run a DNA fingerprint analysis, which helps us gain a better understanding of who was guilty. Once this was obtained, it was separated into 2 VNTR loci. Millie's DNA was also obtained for the DNA analysis. To most accurately figure out which suspect is guilty, we must determine which suspect's bands match the sample DNA perfectly in both locus number 1 and number 2. In looking at the first locus, we can see that there are multiple suspects who match at least one band of the sample hair. However, there are 2 suspects that match it perfectly, which is what we need in order to find out who stole Millie's toy. Although they match one band, Catherine, Elizabeth, and Millie can be ruled out in this locus because their DNA does not match the sample in more than one spot. Based on this information, we can conclude that Caroline and Callie are the 2 suspects that we must pay better attention to in locus number 2 to determine who committed the crime. In moving on to locus 2, we can take what we just figured out from locus 1 and most accurately identify which suspect's bands also match with the sample in locus 2. We must remember that whoever committed the crime's bands will match with the sample perfectly in both 1 and 2. Similarly to the first, there are many suspects who match at least one band. However, there are 2 suspects in this locus that match it perfectly, which allows us to narrow down the list even more. Callie and Elizabeth are the only ones whose bands match perfectly with the sample in this locus. From this, we can rule out Catherine, Millie, and Caroline. Using this information, we can conclude that Callie is guilty of stealing Millie's toy, as her DNA is the only one who matches the sample's hair perfectly in both loci. Finally, in looking at the bands in both loci 1 and 2, we were able to prove that Catherine is Elizabeth's mother because Elizabeth has at least one band that matches Catherine's in both of the loci. This is consistent with the fact that you gain one allele from your father and one from your mother, meaning that Elizabeth's other bands would match her father's if his DNA was on these loci as well.